Hello and welcome back to Joe's Art History Podcast, a podcast that celebrates all things art historical with me, your host and resident art historian, Joe McLaughlin. Hello and welcome back. It is episode 71 and oh my goodness, we have an incredible episode for you today. Joining me on the podcast today is Brandon Musoni, who is a Zimbabwean artist currently based in Cyprus. And today we're going to introduce you to and discuss an incredible series of works by Zimbabwean artist Admire Kamudzengerere. For those that may not know, Admire Kamudzengerere is a contemporary Zimbabwean artist known for his thought-provoking work that often explores themes of identity, power, politics, and the complexities of the social-political landscape of Zimbabwe. Kamudzengerere's art spans various media, including sculpture, painting, installations, and video, and he often blends these to create these very immersive experiences. He grew up in Zimbabwe, and for those that may not know, this is a country marked by significant political and economic challenges. The artist's upbringing post-independence in Zimbabwe has very much shaped his work, and today Brandon and I are going to speak about a series of works known as the Hariri Phone Book series. It's an incredibly powerful episode. Admire is an incredible artist and somebody that really gave a voice to the voiceless, particularly this series. Brandon is an incredible speaker. You can hear the passion and the meaning of what these works and what this artist means to him. It's a really great episode and you're going to really love it. So sit back and relax as Brandon and I discuss the incredible Admire Kamudzengerere. You've selected an incredible artist that I had never heard of before. And as I said before we hit record, I've just had the most interesting morning researching and just learning about this artist who's called Admire. And he really is. Can you just tell me where you first came across him?
So with Admire, like for me, like growing up in Zimbabwe, I grew up like around like in an art space.
Mm-hmm.
So like we would go. My brother was an artist, so we would go around like even like to Zimbabwe National Art Gallery and see stuff. So that's where I initially found his stuff, and from there on was like he just been like growing. Like even like my admiration for him with all his work and stuff is sort of like an inspiration to me.
Yeah, it's really incredible. I mean, can you remember how old you were? Because I can imagine growing up in Zimbabwe, witnessing everything that happens firsthand, because his work is very sort of political. And as someone that, as a young person, sort of looking at this, how did it make you feel for the first time?
The thing is, what I noticed was the things that he was talking about, because even for me, like I was still a little kid.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the things at that time in Zimbabwe we were going through sort of like a dictatorship.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the things that people couldn't talk outside. Like these are things that I knew like my parents would just talk indoors and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
No one even dared to go outside and talk these things. So for me to go outside and see him talking about it like in an open space, it was kind of like mind blowing. And like, it's one of those things that I couldn't believe that he actually had a voice among us, the people who didn't have a voice. So it was so mind blowing for me. From that point on was like, I just fell in love with it.
I mean, and it's something that crossed my mind sort of. And as I said to you before we hit record, I was so ignorant in terms of the history of Zimbabwe as a country, but politically and the governments that it's been under and the oppression and dictatorships, the political upheaval. I can't imagine, and it will make sense as we continue to speak about Admire's work to the listeners, how empowering this must have been. And as you said, like just something that really, I mean, I hate this term, really sort of brave and very bold, and a great example of art giving a voice to the voiceless and making a statement.
Yeah, exactly. Like it was like at that point in time, it was a thing that you couldn't find anywhere else. Like a voice you didn't think, like even to think like we had that voice. And is being like him being bold enough like to even put it out, and even like in at that point in time to even have those thoughts to put something like that outside of just like our comfort homes, like where no one can hear you what you are saying or whatever. And like throughout, like even going way back, like even for us as Zimbabweans, we had like a rough chapter
Yeah.
with under Robert Mugabe.
Mm-hmm.
So it was sort of like, I don't know how to put it, but the way that I can put it is like it was very like is here. It
Yeah.
was very like is here. Like he's actually talking about the things that we thought like no one could even be bold to talk about, especially like the politics side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's really important. I know we've spoken about a little bit about Admire and the type of works that he's or what his work largely explores. But do you want to maybe introduce people to the artist? And because he does a range of works, doesn't he? It's not just. I mean, it's largely political based, but in terms of an artist, he very much is a multimedia, or what is it, as he likes to
Yeah,
describe it, a multi-diversified media artist, which I really loved as a term.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. For me to introduce him, I would say like admire his full name is Admire Kamudzengerere. So
Mm-hmm.
he's like a contemporary artist from Zimbabwe, one of the only few artists that we've had like recently to even be on an international stage. His work is mostly, I would say, like innovative and like using everyday materials, even like from dirt to like grass or all those things. And like it usually blends from like social commentary to like personal stories, like personal narratives to like culture, and like even transforming like ordinary objects like into extraordinary art pieces. And like what I would say is like he kind of uses like a unique perspective
Mm-hmm.
for almost everything that we've had, like even like cultural or political or even like personal things. So his work usually it reflects on those themes, like the identity like of oneself as a Zimbabwean person or as a Zimbabwean man, our culture, where we come from, the memories, the things that we experience as Zimbabweans, or even like on a personal level, like as he himself.
Mm-hmm.
And we have like those like the social and political issues of us like going through like the things that we were going through, and even like till this day. So these are the things that I would say like he's like that artist for us that represents all of those things.
Yeah. And his, to really, I think if you're looking at the works and you don't understand the political upheaval and unrest in Zimbabwe as a country, it's one of these things where you can still really take something from the work. They're very powerful. Yes, they're very personal,
Yeah,
but they're very, anyone could look at them and take something from them. However, when you understand the context and the materialities of what he's using, because as you say, he's taking everyday objects, things that he can find on the streets. And again, that all sort of very much ties into this the state of the country while he is creating. And a lot of his work very much focuses between the periods of 2000 to 2014, um, where he's really sort of
yeah,
reflecting and of what's been happening. Of course, he's a contemporary artist and he's responding to things that are happening all the time. But in particular, you've selected three works which are heavily pieces that are commentary and I think almost calls to action or calls to for the government to really take a long, hard look at themselves and really just sort of speak about the injustices. What piece of the
yeah.
three that you have selected? Well, actually, I think it might be an idea, and I know this is a very like complicated question. Could you give people just for people that a bit like myself, that before I did the research, and I can chime in where I know some things, but can you give people an understanding of the backgrounds of politics in Zimbabwe and why this really is so central to Admire's work? I know that's a very big question.
Yeah. Like, to put it into perspective, before we start talking about these pieces, right? To put it into perspective, for the last, before 2017, for the last 38 years, we had like our president, like the person that was the president at that time, he was kind of like a dictator, even though we had our elections and stuff, but we all knew like everything, like even with the votes and stuff, we all knew that it wasn't like the actual votes. So like, put it into perspective, like even stuff like even talking out about it was something that would get you in trouble. Or even like you have people getting beaten, you had people even going out to protest, it was even like forbidden. Those are the type of things that we were experiencing like for those years, like for those 38 years. You even have like at some point the elections, I think it's like the 2008 elections, when they had like the party, there were two parties, like two main parties. One of it was like ZANU PF, which was like the original, like which was the one led by Mugabe, who was the dictator, and the other one was MDCT, which was led by Changirai, who was like the person who was almost everyone, like people were rallying against, like people were rallying like behind him. So you have an instance like in that year, after the votes, they even announced like that Changirai won. Even though they announced that Changirai won, somehow they still managed to make it so that he won't get into power. That's how deep it was, like for us, like our situation, like our political situation. So, and everyone, like at that time, like we all knew like there's nothing that you can do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was very rough. It was that type of like political situation that even just speaking, like you couldn't even speak freely of your thoughts, of anything. It wasn't even something that we grew up in a way that it wasn't even something that you were supposed to, like we were raised in a way that we weren't even supposed to talk about politics.
Yeah.
So imagine like having to be in that type of environment that you know that you were supposed to have these rights, but you can't even talk. And that's the way that we were raised. Even now with our own, like with the youth and stuff, even though like it's starting to get better, we are still like, I would say like traumatized. Like no one even talk about politics that much outside because of those years that we all went through. Like people were so scared.
Of course.
No one even talked about it. So like that was like the background of like everything that was happening like in that point in time. So yeah, that's the background of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I can't even imagine. I mean, just again, how terrifying that must be to not even be able to speak freely, but yet feel like there might be something, that there might be light at the end of the tunnel, and then that's taken from you. And even so to then have an artist who very openly pushes back and puts works out in across Zimbabwe very openly. Again, just to reiterate to listeners how powerful these pieces are. And they're all part of the same series, correct me if I'm wrong. So it's the Herrera phone book series that they're all from.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about the series?
Yeah, they're all part of the same series. So essentially, they are the pieces that I picked, which is operator, registrar, and voters roll. They are all part of this series called Harare Phone Books, which is like it's sort of like a project that he was working on, like using Harare phone books. You know, those phone books from way back, like for from way back that you would get and like get numbers and stuff if you want to call people and stuff. So he took those and made like artworks from those and made like, so the pieces that I picked, all three of them, they're coming from this same project called Harare Phone Books.
Yeah. And in terms of like someone that grew up in the UK, and from a lot of the listeners in this podcast are from the UK, we had phone books as well, and they were known as the Yellow Pages. And
Yeah.
it was a huge doorstop-esque book that arrived at your door, I think once a year, twice a year. And the first part had advertisements for local businesses or businesses in your area or across the UK. And then it had everybody's information. So if you knew their first and surname and their postcode, you could find their phone number in it. And it was this thing that sat in everyone's kitchen or phone table and hallway. And when I think of a phone book, it's something that's very nostalgic and there's a comfort there. But what Admire has done is he's used this book or these books as a way of, again, showing that your information was used against you, was political asset to keep you quiet, essentially.
Yeah.
And so I think I think I found that juxtaposition very, what's the word? Very sort of self-checking in terms of, oh wow, how an object for one person can be like a very nostalgic thing, but for another
but for another person it's different.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think let's start by talking about, well, which work would you like to start talking about actually? Because they're all, as we said, they're all from this series. And the series, as you said, they're talking about, it's engaging with the country's political history, and it's a direct conversation about the bureaucratic system, voter registry, identity documents, information control. Which one would you like to talk about first?
We can talk about like maybe from operator or registrar.
Sure. Okay. Well, I think registrar is actually the earliest of the work. So registrar and voters roll. So let's start with registrar actually, because operator is an interesting one that because it's in a really interesting collection now. But registrar, hold on, let me get some notes. It's a critique, as we said, on voter information. What does this work sort of bring up for you, and what are your thoughts on registrar?
Like on registrar.
Mm-hmm.
So like for me, right, like these are the things, one of the things, like even with phone books in Zimbabwe, that was happening is originally like a lot of phone books, because originally a lot of phone books, like people didn't afford like to have like a direct landline, like people that were poor in Zimbabwe. So this is like one of the things that's in his work, like with registrar, it's sort of like even started off, like it's even deeper to even think about it. Like he even talks about even social statuses from that again, because like it highlights like how different even with the registrar, like it even highlights like how different like social statuses, their information, like how different it was, because like those numbers and addresses, some people couldn't afford like to have like those numbers and addresses and whatever. So he even talks about it like in a way that even says like when he was making it, like he was wondering like whether the people like that had those phone books, like if they are still like if they were still able to maintain that upper social status associated with having that working landline. So like it's even deeper than even just the politics aspect of it, which is one of the things that I find even more intriguing about the piece.
Yeah, that's actually incredible. And it's something actually that in none of my reading did I pick up on. So again, this is why it's so incredible to speak to, a Zimbabwean who has like lived and breathed and like really understands the importance and sort of context behind these pieces. For people listening at home, just to really sort of give you a visual of what these look like. What Admire has done, he has, now you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Brandon, he's glued all these pages of the phone book together. So he's ripped out pages and he's kind of collaged them together to make this really large piece. And then what he's done is he's gone over the pages and he's painted what I believe are self-portraits. It's this, what I found really interesting about this is I thought, because all the portraits look very similar, and I thought he was maybe using a print of some kind, maybe like a lithograph or sort of wood cutting that he was then, or like a stamp that he was then sort of using to repeat this pattern of the face. And it's not at all. There's I read that the portraits here and also for Voters Roll were portraits that he did after his father had passed away, because he was trying to figure out, or he couldn't remember. He was in a different country. He was in the Netherlands when his father passed, and he couldn't afford to go home, and his dad could never afford to fly to the Netherlands to come and see him. And it was sort of like 8 months after his father died that I read that he began to forgot what his dad looked like. So he started like looking and obsessively doing portraiture to really try and pick the features out of his own face that were his father's, and trying to sort of piece together his memories. And there's a whole thing about he couldn't understand if it was his mind repressing it as a way of trying to protect him from the huge grief and loss that he was going through. And then again, that very much linked into the oppression of the memories of politically what had happened in the country, these people that had no real security or social standing and all sorts of things like that. So it's a really, really powerful piece. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, like what you said, like it's a really powerful piece because like even like from that instance, he even says like he was at that point in time, like he couldn't, there was a point that he couldn't even afford like to paper to draw. So he pick up anything that he could find to, and would just make like a lot of self-portraits, one after the other for hours and hours and hours, drawing even like the slightest clue that came like in his mind. He was just trying to find something out of him that could resemble like his father.
Yeah.
And it's so powerful to think of it like in that way, that this is the thing that ended up turning up to be the registrar, like that piece. It's so powerful.
Yeah. And I read something that the more that he painted the self-portrait, the more that they just became very generic looking, as he sort of did it from memory. And again, that was a nod to the everyman that essentially when Mugabe's government came to power, initially it was a really exciting thing, and they were everybody was promised prosperity and freedom and a different Zimbabwe, and that very, very quickly changed and became not the case. So it was the idea of the everyman that had been overlooked and forgotten, and yet should have a voice and should have a line in this book, and doesn't, or it was used against them in some way. I see a lot of art day to day, every single day of my life. I'm constantly interacting with art. I cannot remember the last time I researched a series like this where I just thought, wow, this is why art is important. It gives the voice to the voiceless. It can communicate things that really, like, I mean, I'm so moved researching this series. It's so powerful. And yeah, and that's me as a Scottish woman with no connections to Zimbabwe, Zimbabweans, nothing. And I find it so powerful. So I can't even imagine what it must feel like for yourself, or especially as a young child, maybe like looking at these. Yeah, I just think they're unbelievable.
Yeah, like what you said, like for us, like looking at it, like I think it was like a revelation. Like we didn't even know like we could do something like that
Yeah.
bold, and we didn't even know like even you remember like when I sent you initially when I sent you like the email about
Yeah.
how like yeah like my experience through it, how I actually like go to for me even like as an artist, like for me to even get to relate to it, because like even in Zimbabwe too, like it wasn't art wasn't like a thing that we can as Zimbabweans, like it wasn't like a thing that we it was emphasized. Most of it is usually academics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I it wasn't like one of the major things that was emphasized. So even for us to look at it from that angle to be like, this is like this person is talking about us, like
Yeah.
our story, and we can see like through it, like this is the things that we are living. And he is an artist, like he's an artist. One of the things that has been neglected, like in Zimbabwe, like art itself, it was so like in all angles looking at it, like for me, that's one of the things that I look at it like with this piece, and like I can relate with everything, like everything about it. Like for me, it speaks to me like directly. It's a powerful feeling.
It's so powerful. And again, it just shows you that I think that's what everybody wants to, the things that they look at and consume. You are looking for recognition or understanding of yourself and what else is going on in the world. And I just, even what you said there, art traditionally, even in, sort of British art history, it's celebrating landed gentry, it's celebrating kings and queens and great conquerors. There's no real reference to the everyday man, the everyday struggle, but actually contemporary art very much flips that on its head. I think this is just an incredible example of that. It's so powerful. Let's go on then and talk about operator or do you want to, yeah, operator or voter's role? Let's talk about operator because again, it's the same type of series. Again, it's this collaging of a phone book. What I really love is the multimedia aspect of this. An operator I find really interesting as a piece because it's now in the US Embassy's collection,
Yeah.
which is incredible. Now, I'm not sure if it's in the embassy in Zimbabwe. I don't know if there is an embassy in Zimbabwe, but there's a whole website that I found that was art in for the US Embassy have their whole collection. And I'll leave a link in the show notes to that if anyone's interested just to see, because they have a few pieces of Admires in their collection. Tell me about this one and why this one is interesting to you.
For me, like this is like one of the pieces that this is one of the pieces that for me, because like the way that he was making it, he talks about it being like he was using uh okay, on his biography he talks about it using the earth to make it, like using things like soil, like
Mm.
literally putting on soil and oil and like scrubbing it. Those are the things that even like looking at it and having to tell a story, like I'm using this thing, this earth, this Zimbabwean earth, to
Mm.
tell stories about Zimbabwean people. And even I don't know, like if you knew about Zimbabwe, one of the things even like from way back with our cultural heritage and stuff, one of the things that was emphasized even like with our ancestors and stuff is about the way that they would use the earth for the things around them, like the earth to build and stuff. We even have like one of the biggest like old buildings and stuff like from way back, which is Great Zimbabwe. And it's one of the things that we celebrate. And those people, they used to just use mud and stuff like to make that type of like anything that they would want to do, build things and stuff. So for him to even go back to making this thing and like putting it like into that perspective, like even to put it into that perspective, using that, like, for me, like, it's really something that I remember, like, one of the things, like, when I was going through it and stuff, because, like, me and my brother, we used to have, like, this, whenever he'd take me, like, to these things, like these arts stuff and stuff, we used to have printouts and look at stuff and stuff that we can find, like, in galleries and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, like, even way back, that was one of the things that we looked at, like, like, oh, it's even, like, this deep, like, the cultural heritage in it. So, like, it's one of the things that, for us, like, for a Zimbabwean, looking at it, it means so much.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what else I can add to that other than it's, yeah, I love that the link back to working with the earth and your connection with the earth as well. And I think, again, using these phone books and sort of using earth on top of this, again, it really sort of reiterates heritage, grounding yourself, and just, again, that it's almost in a way that it's your land that has been like taken from you from this one person, and you're scared to operate as freely as you shouldn't and want to be. It's such a powerful piece. And again, now that I understand the context of the materials and what's in it, it should sit in an embassy office as a way of reminding people that it's your responsibility as government body to respect the people and serve the people. Sadly, that is not the case for a lot
Yeah,
of countries all over the world. But a really, like, really powerful piece.
yeah. And, like, sadly, like, with our situation, like, with the things that we were going through, it was the opposite.
Mm,
It was the opposite. Like, we didn't have there was not, like, a direct approach to even save, like, the common person, that is the Zimbabwean person, like the Zimbabwean common person, like, on the ground. There wasn't any. So, like, with land and stuff, even have things like, and one of the things also, like, I think I had forgotten about this. One of the things also that was happening, like, around that time, they did this thing that, because a lot of Zimbabweans, people were struggling, so
mhm,
people were just trying to make a living, like, out of anything and stuff. So you'd have, like, things like, if someone has a background, they would put, like, a cabin or something,
mhm,
and, like, try to rent it out to someone so that, like, people can live and stuff, and they can have, like, somewhere to live, and they can make money out of something, at least, because at that time things were really hard. And they had, like, the government had, like, this thing that they called, like, Muramba Trina, which was to destroy all of those things. And those were the things that people didn't have jobs, didn't have anything. So they were trying to make something out of a little that they have,
mhm.
and then launched, like, this thing, like, to destroy all of those things.
Wow.
And you look at it and be like, oh, and, like, we didn't have anything. We are trying to make something, like, out of the little that we have. And even though, like, you yourself, like, the you can't rectify, like, the things that are happening for you to give us a chance to make a living, you are still going to put more pressure for us, like, to not even, like, have anything that we can at least
Yeah.
live off. So it was very, like, they launched that system. So it was, like, one of the things that was happening, like, around that time too, when he made that piece. So it's very even, like, powerful to even to that extent too.
Yeah. That's wow. It's again, this whole series has completely blown my mind today. It's like the ignorance or lack of education of what's happening or in Zimbabwe, what had happened in Zimbabwe is so, yeah, it's a really prominent, eye opening series. Yeah, and it means I can hear it in your voice how much Admire's work means to you and
Yeah.
the power that it has. Let's move on and talk about the last work that you've selected. And this is a really interesting one because from what I understand, this is one of his larger works in the series. Is an absolutely monumental piece.
Yeah.
And it was actually first displayed in New York.
Yeah.
Because something about Admire, which we haven't really discussed, is he's actually very successful, and he was the second Zimbabwe artist to be given residency at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. I think that was
Yeah.
2012. So he was there and trained, or did some training and sort of studied there while to develop his practice. He also he is represented by a New York gallery. He also represented Zimbabwe at the Venice Biennale. I think that was 2017. He has a US representative. If anyone is interested in the types of prices that his works are selling for, you just have to type his name into Artsy, and they're going for tens of thousands of pounds, which I completely agree. But he also runs an artist in residency program of a farm in Zimbabwe, which I'm completely obsessed with, and him as a person. I'll leave a link below for anyone that's interested in learning about the residency in Zimbabwe. And Admire speaks about his passion for connecting with other artists and his purpose behind founding the residency, which I think is incredible. But this piece was displayed in New York, from my understanding. And again, very similar to the others in the series. What was it about this that made you select it?
This is actually like one of the biggest pieces that I can say, one of the most important pieces in Zimbabwean, like recently, like in Zimbabwean art history. Let me just read this, like what he says here.
Mm-hmm.
He says, when you play a chessboard, each piece has a position. It belongs to the game, but it doesn't only belong to the game. It's mirrored in real life. So what he is talking about here is the voters' role, like the role that people played, like in the elections, like side of things, like in the election side, like the political part of Zimbabwe, the voters. So it's sort of like a celebration in how like people played their part, like voting, and like with everything that was going on with the elections and stuff. And he even says like it is only like during times of election that brothers turn against brothers. And like because like from this point, it was like, mind you, like we had all this time we're going through like a dictatorship and stuff. And like after that dictatorship, that was like the first time that we like actually like felt like this was the first time that we were going to vote for something that is tangible, because like we knew that there wasn't anything behind it, like people were going to play, people were going to misuse or deny certain stuff. So this was like a celebration to how like the voters, like they will be playing their parts into this thing. So this is, I would say, like this is one of the most important recent art pieces in Zimbabwean art history.
Yeah, I mean, it's so powerful. And again, I think the scale of it is also trying to, I suppose, in a very small way, sort of nod to how the whole country in itself, as you said, was really, were voting for something tangible that couldn't be taken away from them. Because 2017, when this piece was made, this is when there was a military coup in Zimbabwe, and Mugabe was resigned and thrown out. And there was, before that, as you've said, there was elections, but there was vote rigging, there was political, and people did run against, there was political opponents, but they faced violence, and essentially people were terrified of voting against, and even if they did, the system was rigged in itself. Which I know things in the UK can be bad, but it's never been to the scale of this. So it really makes us, like our political system, look like a complete walk in the park, despite the whole Brexit fiasco. This is, yeah, I'm a wee bit lost for words, to be honest with you. It's such an incredible piece. Is this in the National Museum in Zimbabwe? No, or is it still in New York?
The last time I checked, it was still in New York. I don't know if like they moved it to Zimbabwe, because recently he had another exhibition in Zimbabwe. So I don't know if they moved it to Zimbabwe yet.
Yeah, I think it's such an important piece. I do think there's something that's so powerful and can speak to so many. And, you know, bring that common thread of the country together, I do think something this important should be in the National Museum. I really do.
Yeah, and that's like a hope that he was talking about. Like, this is the hope that we now have, like, for us, like, to this is the first time that we are going, like, voicing and thinking about, like, actually, like, our voice is gonna matter. So
Yeah.
this is like the hope, like, of the new Zimbabwe. Like, this is what we are looking at, the future, like what's going to happen. Like, it's so powerful. Like,
Yeah.
coming from a Zimbabwean, like, I can't even, like, put it into words to, like.
Yeah, I just got a little chill actually. There was just something in your voice that was just so passionate. And again, it's almost like a beacon of hope, isn't it? That finally the political fate of the nation, all these people, again, reminding everyone, this is all printed on phone books. This is so it's a beacon to say that every single person on these pages, it is your turn to have your say in your country, and it's your future. Oh, it's so powerful. It's so powerful.
Yeah.
Considering it's the thing that most of us who had a phone book didn't, it just sort of sat on the corner, and there's a nostalgic thing to it. You don't ever really think about the power of thinking about all the people line by line by line. Like, that's a nation, it's your army of people, not in a military sense of army, but your communities, your families, your extended families, it's so powerful, so powerful.
Yeah. And to look at it, like, even, like, in that aspect that you were talking, like, it being, like, on the phone books, like, it represents each and every person there with their number, their identity there. And you're looking at it like, all these are people, like, on that, like, that are playing that voters role
Yeah.
into this thing, into this new hope, this new Zimbabwean hope, the future that we are going to create.
Oh my goodness, I could speak about this with you forever. Brandon, thank you so, so much for coming on and talking about Admire. I said it before we hit record. I think I said it after we hit record. I'm going to say it again. Thank you so much. I have had the most incredible morning researching this series of works. And I really hope that the listeners, actually, I don't hope, I know the listeners listening to this episode, every now and again, you record something that's really, really special. And this is a really special episode. So thank you so, so much.
Thank you for bringing me through and talking about my Zimbabwean heritage, my Zimbabwean art history.
Oh, I've loved it. And you've taught me so, so much. Brandon, before we go, where can people find you and connect with you? Because you're also an artist.
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram. My page is I am Sish with CISSH. Yeah, like, everything is there. Yeah, thank you.
Amazing. Brandon, I don't know if you've listened to the podcast before. It's not compulsory for guests, but I do try and end the podcast by asking each of my guests the same question. It's a really big question, so you can take a minute and you can make it as personal to you or as wide reaching as possible. But the final question I would like to ask you is, why is art important?
Yeah, that's a big question.
Mm.
Let me answer it, like, in a way, like, in a personal way.
Mm-hmm.
For me, like, art is important. Like, I would say it's an expression far beyond just, like, what we what we go through.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's an expression and it's an expression that goes beyond just, like, us talking or whatever. It can be, like, even, like, in this instance, it's a beacon of hope. Like,
Mm-hmm.
voters row, like, if you look at, like, voters row, it's a beacon of hope. It goes far beyond just him just saying those words that this will be the most important, like, voicing and stuff. It goes far beyond that. It's an expression that is, like, that I also feel like, on a more personal level, it's even like helped me to talk about stuff that is far beyond stuff that I can just talk about. Like
Yeah.
me personally, just talking to someone, I can go far beyond when I'm painting it, or when I'm animating it, or it's an expression from deep within that goes far beyond what I can talk about.
Oh, I love that. I love that. That's so beautiful and so powerful and so true, and such a lovely link back to Admire and what he does too. Brandon, thank you so much. I've absolutely loved this. Thank you. And there you have it, another episode of Jo's Art History podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you have enjoyed this episode, please make sure that you are following along on whatever platform you are listening to, or if you're watching us on YouTube, to like, rate and subscribe to the channel. Both of these things help the podcast grow week on week. If you would like to support the podcast in some way, please consider sharing this episode with a friend or relative that you think would also enjoy listening to it, or posting it on social media. This really does help build the listener database, and it's very much appreciated from my side of things. If you're also feeling a little bit generous and you would like to support the future of the podcast and future episodes, please consider purchasing a book from my Amazon wishlist, which is in the show notes below. And everything that you purchase comes straight to me and goes towards research for a future episode, or even equipment to make the podcast sound better and better season on season. If you would like to get in touch, please feel free to do so. You can email me, joesarthistory@gmail.com, or you can connect and find me on Instagram, which is @joesarthistory. Please do feel free to send me a little message. It's always lovely to hear from people. And if you've enjoyed an episode that you've listened to with a guest on it, please also feel free to send guests on the podcast a message as well. It means so much to them that you've engaged with their topic of interest, and a small message really does go a long way. Finally, I've been Jo McLaughlin, your host and resident art historian here on Jo's Art History podcast, and thank you so much for listening. Until next time, keep learning, and remember, art is for all. Bye.